She showed up to her blind date covered in mud, expecting embarrassment, but his reaction turned everything upside down. Lila had been looking forward to this blind date for days. She had heard stories from her friends about blind dates going terribly wrong, but she had always been hopeful that maybe, just maybe, this one would turn out differently. She had gotten dressed in her favorite outfit, a simple dress that made her feel confident, and carefully styled her hair. But as fate would have it, her plans were about to take a turn she never expected. The morning had been uneventful. She left her small apartment with enough time to spare. However, halfway to the cafe, her car hit a patch of mud on the side of the country road she had to cross. At first, she thought she could just drive through it. But the mud was deeper than she expected, and soon her car was stuck. She tried everything she could think of, rocking the car back and forth, pressing the accelerator gently, even stepping out to see if she could push it with her bare hands. But nothing worked. The more she struggled, the more the mud seemed to swallow her tires, until her car finally gave a hopeless groan and refused to move another inch. Lila's heart sank. She looked at the clock on her dashboard and realized that she was going to be late. Panic set in, and her hand shook as she dialed a tow service. But even that couldn't save the time she had lost. She watched the minutes tick by, imagining the blind date waiting at the cafe, probably wondering why she wasn't there yet. Anxiety bubbled up in her chest, and for a moment she considered calling to cancel. What if he thought she was irresponsible? What if he didn't show up? Eventually, the tow service arrived, and the driver helped pull her car out of the mud. By now, her carefully planned outfit was smeared with dirt, and her shoes were ruined. Her hair, which had taken so much effort to style, now hung in uneven strands around her face. Lila stared at her reflection in the rear-view mirror and felt a wave of embarrassment. She had never been late or messy on a date before, and she couldn't shake the fear that this would be the first and last time someone would want to meet her. Despite everything, she decided not to give up. She knew she couldn't let one accident ruin the chance for something potentially good. With determination, she quickly wiped the mud off her face as best she could, adjusted her dress, and took a deep breath. The cafe wasn't far from her location, so she figured she could still make it, though she knew she would arrive looking nothing like the neat, put-together person she had planned to be as she walked into the cafe. Lila felt all eyes on her, or at least she imagined they were. Her heart raced, and she felt a strange mixture of nervousness and self-consciousness. Every step she took made her worry that the mud on her shoes and the smudges on her dress were more noticeable than they really were. She glanced around the room, spotting empty tables. And then her eyes landed on him. Jason, sitting casually at a corner table, looking at his phone. Her first instinct was to turn around and run. She could see the shock on her own face, mirrored in the way she hesitated at the doorway. She had imagined meeting someone for a first date where everything would go smoothly, clean clothes, hair perfectly in place, polite conversation. This was nothing like that. This was chaos. This was mud, embarrassment, and anxiety all rolled into one. Lila took another deep breath and reminded herself that he had agreed to this blind date. He didn't know her yet. Maybe he wouldn't even notice the mud. Maybe he would be kind. She walked toward him cautiously, each step heavier than the last, until she finally reached the table. Jason looked up from his phone, and for a moment Lila froze. She braced herself for a comment about her appearance, a laugh, or worse, silence. Instead, he smiled. Not a polite, uncomfortable smile, but a genuine, warm smile that seemed to melt some of her anxiety away. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Hey, you made it," he said casually. "Sit down, don't worry about anything." Lila blinked, almost in disbelief. No judgment, no teasing, no awkward silence, just acceptance. She sat down slowly, still feeling a bit embarrassed. But there was a strange sense of relief in the way he didn't seem to care about the mud, the smudged hair, or the messy dress. She realized then that maybe first impressions weren't always about looking perfect. Sometimes they were about showing up and being real. As they exchanged greetings, Lila began to notice something else. Jason didn't just accept her presence. He made her feel comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. His voice was calm, his questions thoughtful, and there was a kindness in his eyes that told her he was interested in getting to know her as a person, not as a version of herself she had tried to present. For the first time since the car incident, Lila started to relax. She laughed nervously as she explained how she had gotten stuck in the mud, exaggerating some parts to make it sound funny. Jason listened attentively, chuckling at the right moments, never making her feel foolish. It was a strange but comforting contrast, the chaotic morning that had left. Her feeling embarrassed was suddenly turning into a shared story, something that could be laughed about instead of hiding by the time they ordered their drinks. Lila's anxiety had started to fade. She realized that the accident, the mud, and the mess had all been outside of her control, and yet she had still shown up. And that, she thought quietly to herself, might actually be more impressive than any perfectly planned outfit. She felt a spark of hope, a sense that maybe this blind date could turn into something real, even if it had started in the mud, even though she was still conscious of her appearance. Lila felt an unexpected sense of confidence. She had faced a moment of panic and embarrassment, yet she hadn't given up. And as she looked across the table at Jason, she felt a flicker of curiosity and excitement. Perhaps, she realized, some of the best stories in life began with moments you least expect, with situations that seemed disastrous at first, but ended up being strangely memorable. Lila's hand still trembled slightly as she sat down across from Jason, unsure of what to expect next. The cafe around them was cozy, with soft chatter from other patrons and the gentle clinking of cups and plates. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries filled the air, making the place feel welcoming. Yet Lila's mind was stuck on one thing, her appearance. She tugged slightly at the hem of her muddy dress and brushed some stray strands of hair away from her face, wishing she could magically transform into the neat, composed person she had imagined she would be. Jason, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed. He didn't glance at her dress, he didn't comment on her hair, and he certainly didn't make a joke at her expense. Instead, he looked at her with genuine interest, his eyes warm and inviting. "I'm glad you made it," he said again, as if the mud on her dress didn't even exist. He gestured toward the menu. "Can I get you something to drink while we figure out what we want to eat?" Lila blinked, surprised at his kindness. Her nervousness had been telling her that he would judge her. But here he was, treating her like she was exactly where she belonged. "Just a coffee, please," she said quietly, her voice a little shaky. Jason nodded and smiled, giving her a reassuring look before he went to place the order, left alone for a few moments. Lila felt her anxiety start to ebb. She realized that part of what had been terrifying her wasn't just the mood, it was the fear of judgment, of being seen in a less than perfect state. And now, watching Jason return with their drinks, she felt a glimmer of hope that maybe she had misjudged how the date would go. "Here you go," Jason said, setting her coffee in front of her with a smile. "I promise, it tastes better than it looks," he joked lightly, and Lila laughed despite herself. It was a small, simple moment, but it broke the tension she had been carrying in her shoulders. She realized that he wasn't just being polite, he genuinely wanted her to feel comfortable. As they settled into their conversation, Lila began to notice something about Jason that surprised her. He didn't rush to ask the typical first date questions. He didn't ask her where she worked or what her hobbies were in a way that felt like an interrogation. Instead, he asked her about little things, about her day, about how her week had been. His questions felt sincere, thoughtful, and easygoing. It was a relief, and it made her start to open up naturally. Lila started with the story of her morning, how she had gotten stuck in the mud and the chaos that followed. She exaggerated a few details for humor, how the mud seemed to have a mind of its own, how she had tried to push the car with all her might and failed. Jason listened, leaning slightly forward, his eyes bright with amusement. He laughed at the right moments, not in a mocking way, but in a way that made her feel like they were sharing the moment together. "You know," Jason said, smiling, "if this had happened to me, I would have panicked completely. I probably would have called everyone I knew to rescue me and cried a little in the process." Lila laughed again, feeling a little less self-conscious about her own reaction. It was comforting to hear someone else admit they would have been overwhelmed too. It made her realize that accidents happen to everyone, It didn't make her any less capable or worthy. As their conversation continued, Leela noticed how patient Jason was. He didn't interrupt her, he didn't try to steer the story in a different direction. And he didn't glance at his phone once. His full attention was on her, and it made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. She started to relax, letting go of some of the embarrassment that had been holding her back. She even found herself smiling, something she hadn't done much that morning, and it felt freeing. Jason shared some stories of his own. Small anecdotes about his daughter, about work, and the little joys and frustrations of daily life. His tone was warm and easygoing, and Lila found herself genuinely laughing at some of his tales. She realized that he wasn't putting on a facade either. He was just being himself, and it made the conversation flow effortlessly. For the first time that day, she forgot about the mud entirely. She was no longer the girl who had arrived flustered and embarrassed. She was simply Lila, talking to someone who was kind, attentive, and genuinely interested in her at one point. Jason leaned back in his chair and asked, "So, what's the most ridiculous thing that's happened to you recently?" Leela thought for a moment, then recounted another funny mishap from her week, how she had spilled coffee on herself at work the day before and tried to pretend nothing happened. Jason laughed, a full, hearty laugh that made Lila feel lighter. She realized that she could be herself around him, imperfections and all. He wouldn't think less of her. As they continued talking, Lila noticed something else about the way Jason interacted. He didn't just listen. He remembered the details. He asked about small things she mentioned earlier, like a project at work or a hobby she enjoyed. It made her feel valued, as if her words truly mattered. For someone who had been so nervous and self-conscious just moments before, it was an unexpected but welcome feeling. Time seemed to pass quickly. What had started as a potentially disastrous first encounter had transformed into something comfortable and natural. Lila realized that first impressions weren't always about looking perfect or arriving without mishap. Sometimes they were about showing up, being real, and finding someone who could see past the surface. Jason's reaction had stunned her not because it was extraordinary, but because it was simple, genuine kindness. By the time they finished their drinks, Lila felt a surprising sense of ease. The mud on her dress and the messy strands of hair no longer mattered. What mattered was the connection she was beginning to feel, the laughter they shared, and the sense that maybe this blind date wasn't just a chance encounter, it could be the start of something meaningful. As they got up to leave the cafe, Lila realized she was smiling more than she had in a long time. Jason held the door open for her, his smile reassuring. She knew that whatever happened next, this first part of the date, the awkward arrival, the mud, the nervous introduction, would be a story they could both laugh about someday. It was a beginning, messy and imperfect, but real, and that made all the difference. Lila walked beside Jason as they left the cafe. Her spirits lifted in ways she hadn't expected. The mud from her morning disaster still clung to her shoes and the bottom of her dress, but it no longer mattered. The embarrassment she had felt earlier had been replaced by a curious excitement. For the first time that day, she felt like she could actually be herself. Messy imperfections included, and it was liberating, as they found a quiet spot by the small park outside the cafe. Jason leaned against a tree and gestured toward a bench. "Sit with me for a bit," he asked, his tone casual, yet inviting. Leela nodded, settling onto the bench with a slight laugh as she tried to wipe some of the mud from her skirt, only to realize it was hopeless. She didn't care. Somehow, it felt right, like she had survived the morning chaos and come out on the other side. Jason started talking about his daughter, Emma, and as he spoke, Leela realized something remarkable. His stories weren't just surface level. They were honest, filled with small, real-life moments. He described how Emma insisted on wearing mismatched socks every day, how she loved to draw pictures for him, and how she had once tried to teach him to bake cookies, resulting in a flour explosion across the kitchen. Leela laughed, imagining the scene, and Jason laughed too, his eyes lighting up with warmth and fondness. "What's she like in school?" Lila asked, genuinely curious. Jason smiled softly. "Smart, stubborn, and endlessly curious," he said. "She asks questions about everything. Sometimes I can't answer them, but I try anyway. She keeps me on my toes." There was a pride in his voice, a deep love that was evident in every word. Leela felt a strange admiration for him, realizing that raising a child on his own had not been easy. Yet he approached it with patience and dedication, encouraged by his openness. Lila began to share stories from her own life, slowly at first, then with more confidence. She spoke about her childhood, the neighborhood she grew up in, and the struggles she had faced along the way. She told him about the small victories she had achieved, the moments of doubt she had overcome, and the people who had shaped her. Jason listened without interruption, nodding at appropriate moments, his eyes never leaving hers. He didn't just hear her words, he seemed to understand the emotions behind them as they shared their stories. Lila noticed the laughter between them growing more natural. It wasn't the nervous, polite kind of laughter one often hears on a first date. It was genuine, spontaneous, a reflection of comfort and connection. At one point, she realized she had forgotten about the mud entirely. That earlier embarrassment fading into a memory that felt almost trivial now. The moment mattered more than appearances, and Jason's presence had made her see that. There was a quiet pause, and Lila noticed the subtle ways Jason made her feel valued. He asked thoughtful follow-up questions about things she mentioned in passing, like a book she had read or a hobby she enjoyed. Each question showed that he was truly listening, not just waiting for his turn to speak. It was a rarity she hadn't anticipated on a blind date. It left her feeling unexpectedly seen and respected. Jason, sensing her comfort, shared a few more personal stories. He spoke about the challenges of balancing work and parenting, the small moments of frustration, and the overwhelming joy of seeing Emma accomplish something new. He admitted the days when he felt exhausted and unsure, and Lila found herself admiring his honesty. It wasn't just that he had a daughter, it was the way he approached life, embracing both the struggles and the joys. That impressed her, feeling a surge of courage. Lila opened up further, revealing some of her vulnerabilities. She spoke about times when she had felt out of place, misunderstood, or undervalued. Jason listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. His presence was steady and reassuring, a grounding force that made her feel safe enough to reveal parts of herself she usually kept hidden. Lila realized that trust wasn't something that happened instantly, but in that moment. She felt a spark of it growing between them. The conversation gradually turned to lighter topics, playful exchanges that revealed shared humor and common interests. They discussed favorite movies, silly childhood fears, and unusual talents. Lila found herself laughing freely, enjoying the natural rhythm of their dialogue. There was no pretense, no forced attempts to impress. It was simply two people connecting in a genuine way. And Lila marveled at how rare and refreshing it felt as the sun began to dip lower in the sky. Casting a golden glow over the park, Lila realized that hours had passed without either of them noticing. She had gone from feeling mortified about arriving in mud to feeling completely at ease, laughing and sharing stories with a stranger who now felt more like a friend. Jason had a way of making her feel appreciated for who she truly was. Beyond appearances, beyond awkward moments, and that was more extraordinary than she could have imagined. Jason leaned back on the bench, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said softly, "most people wouldn't have shown up after a morning like yours. But you did, and I admire that." Lila felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't a compliment about her looks, her dress, or her hairstyle. It was about her perseverance, her willingness to show up despite difficulties. That acknowledgement mattered more than any surface-level praise ever could. Lila realized that this was what made the difference. It wasn't just about surviving a messy morning, it was about showing resilience, being genuine, and being willing to connect. Jason's reaction stunned her, not because he said something extravagant, but because he had treated her with kindness and respect from the very beginning. His response had transformed what could have been a humiliating experience into an opportunity for connection and understanding. By the time they stood up to leave the park, Lila felt a sense of contentment and excitement she hadn't expected at the start of the day. She looked at Jason, grateful for his patience and warmth, and for the way he had listened to her without judgment. The blind date had started in chaos, but it was shaping up to be something meaningful. Lila knew that first impressions could be misleading, and this experience was proof that the true measure of someone's character wasn't in their reaction to perfection, but in their response to honesty and vulnerability. As they walked back toward the street, Lila felt lighter, more confident, and surprisingly hopeful. She had arrived covered in mud, nervous and ashamed, but she was leaving with a sense of connection and possibility that she hadn't anticipated. Jason's reaction had shown her that real relationships weren't built on appearances, they were built on understanding, empathy, and shared experiences. For the first time in a long while, Lila felt like she had met someone who could see her for who she truly was, and it was a feeling that left her quietly smiling all the way home. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the quiet park, and Lila felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in a long time. She and Jason had spent hours talking, sharing stories, laughing, and occasionally pausing to simply enjoy the peaceful surroundings. It was amazing how quickly time had passed. Lila realized that the awkwardness she had feared at the start of the day had completely vanished. Instead, a sense of warmth and genuine connection had taken its place. Jason suggested they take a slow walk along the path that wound through the park. She could feel the soft chill of the evening in the air, but it didn't bother her. Walking beside him, she felt a sense of ease that was rare and almost magical. It was as if the world around them had quieted, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of shared conversation and laughter. "So," Jason began, glancing at her with a soft smile. "Tell me something you don't usually tell people on a first date." Lila thought for a moment, her mind racing through possibilities, but then she realized that she had already shared more than she thought she would. "I guess I've never really talked about how scared I can get about failing," she admitted. "I try to hide it, act confident, but sometimes it's overwhelming. I just don't want people to see that side of me." Jason nodded thoughtfully, listening carefully. "I get that," he said gently. "I felt the same way a lot of times. People often only see the surface, but underneath, everyone has fears and doubts. It's not a weakness, it's human. And I think being honest about it takes courage." His words made Lila pause. She felt a warmth spread in her chest, a comfort that she hadn't expected. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it with understanding, without judgment. Encouraged by his openness, Lila asked him about the challenges of being a single dad. Jason hesitated for a brief moment, then spoke honestly. He shared the difficulties he faced trying to balance work, parenting, and a social life. He talked about the exhaustion of sleepless nights, the pressure of being the sole provider, and the constant worry of making the right decisions for his daughter, Emma. Yet, in the same breath, he spoke about the joys her laughter, her hugs, the pride he felt watching her learn and grow. Lila could see the love and dedication in his eyes, and it made her admire him even more. As they continued walking, Lila opened up about her own struggles. She told Jason about her attempts to find stability in her job, challenges she had faced in her family, and the moments when she had felt isolated or misunderstood. With every story, she noticed how Jason's expressions reflected empathy rather than pity. He asked gentle questions, encouraging her to elaborate without prying, and his attentiveness made her feel safe. For the first time in a long while, Lila felt like someone truly understood her experiences. Their conversation shifted naturally to shared experiences, and they began comparing the small, humorous challenges they had both faced. Lila recounted an embarrassing work incident, and Jason responded with a story about a parenting mishap that left his kitchen covered in pancake batter. They laughed together, the sound of their laughter blending with the rustling leaves around them. Lila felt a strange but wonderful sense of connection. It went beyond the usual small talk of first dates. Jason's approach to conversation was different from anyone Lila had ever met. He didn't try to impress her with grand gestures or clever remarks. Instead, he focused on listening, understanding, and sharing. It made her feel valued and respected, and she realized that this was rare. Most people she had dated before had been focused on themselves, but Jason's attention was genuine and unwavering. Lila felt like she could reveal her true self without fear, and that thought was liberating. They found a bench overlooking a small pond, and Jason gestured for her to sit. Lila noticed how comfortable she felt beside him, the awkwardness of the earlier moments completely gone. She shared more stories from her past, including some moments of vulnerability she hadn't planned to discuss. Jason listened quietly, offering nods of understanding, small smiles, and occasional laughter when appropriate. His reactions made her feel seen, heard, and appreciated for who she truly was. Jason, in turn, shared deeper aspects of his life. He talked about the lessons he had learned as a parent, the mistakes he had made, the personal growth he had experienced along the way. He admitted that being a single dad was not easy, but it had taught him patience, resilience, and the importance of cherishing small, meaningful moments. Lila found herself inspired by his honesty and maturity, and she realized that his openness had encouraged her to be more open as well at one point. Jason looked at Lila with a smile and said, "You know, it's funny. Most people wouldn't have handled a morning like yours with such grace. You could have canceled, given up, or let embarrassment ruin the day, but you didn't. You showed up. And that says a lot about you." Lila felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't a comment about her appearance or superficial traits. It was recognition of her courage, resilience, and authenticity. It made her heart swell with appreciation for him. The conversation gradually became lighter again, filled with shared laughter and playful teasing. They discovered common interests in movies, books, and music, and their easy rapport made the time fly. Lila noticed that she was no longer self-conscious about small things, her mud-stained dress, her messy hair, or the awkwardness she had felt earlier. Those details no longer mattered because she had found someone who saw past them, someone who valued her for who she was inside. As twilight approached, the park took on a soft, golden hue, and Lila felt a quiet sense of contentment. She realized that the blind date had evolved into something more meaningful than she could have imagined. It was no longer about appearances, timing, or small mishaps. It was about genuine connection, mutual understanding, and shared laughter. Jason had shown her that kindness, patience, and attentiveness could make even the most embarrassing situations feel comfortable and even memorable. Finally, as they prepared to leave the park, Jason offered to walk her back to her car. Lila felt a sense of gratitude for his thoughtfulness and reliability. The morning chaos, the mud, and the nerves seemed like distant memories compared to the warmth and connection she now felt. She smiled to herself, realizing that sometimes the best moments in life came from unexpected circumstances, from people who responded with understanding and care rather than judgment. As they approached her car, Jason looked at her and said, "Today turned out to be better than I expected. Thank you for sharing your stories and for just being yourself." Lila felt a wave of happiness. His words weren't just polite, they were sincere, a reflection of the bond they had started to build over the past few hours. For the first time that day, she felt completely seen, completely accepted, and completely at ease. Lila realized that what had started as a stressful and embarrassing day had transformed into something beautiful. The mishaps, the mud, and the nervousness had all led her to a genuine connection with someone who valued authenticity above all else. She knew that this was more than just a blind day. It was a reminder that life's unexpected moments often held the potential for meaningful, lasting connections. She felt hopeful, excited, and quietly thrilled about what might come next, knowing that she had found someone who could see her, truly see her, for who she was, and that feeling was priceless. By the time Lila and Jason reached the parking lot, the sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, the last traces of sunlight slipping behind the buildings. Lila's heart was still light from the day, but there was also a quiet nervousness. She had spent hours with Jason, talking and laughing, sharing pieces of their lives that usually stayed hidden, and now it felt like a turning point. She had never imagined a blind date could feel so real, so comforting, so surprisingly effortless. Jason stopped beside her car and turned to her with a soft smile. "So, this is it," he said gently. "I hope you didn't have too much trouble today." Lila laughed, glancing down at her mud-stained shoes and the lower hem of her dress. "Trouble. That's one way to put it," she replied, her voice teasing but warm. "But somehow it turned out better than I expected." Jason chuckled, shaking his head. I'd say it turned out perfectly if you ask me. You made me laugh, surprised me with your stories, and somehow survived mud, traffic, and nerves all at once. That deserves a medal. Leela laughed again, feeling her earlier anxiety dissolve completely. She realized that, for the first time in a long time, she could see herself through someone else's kind perspective. Someone who valued more than appearances. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a small packet of tissues. 4. Emergency cleanup, he said, grinning. Lila couldn't help but laugh, taking the tissues with mock seriousness. Thanks, hero, she said. You really went above and beyond today. Jason's smile widened. All in a day's work, he said lightly. But there was warmth in his tone that made her heart lift. Lila leaned against her car, realizing how natural it felt to stand next to Jason, how safe and comfortable. Their earlier conversation, the laughter, the stories they had created a bond, fragile but promising. She felt an unexpected urge to prolong the moment, to not let the day end. I had a really good time, she said softly, looking up at him. I mean, I didn't expect this day to go like this, but it really did. Jason's eyes softened, and he nodded. Me too. Honestly, I wasn't sure how this would go. Blind dates can be unpredictable, he admitted. But being with you today has been easy, comfortable, and that's rare. Leela felt a warmth in her chest. Easy and comfortable were exactly the words she had hoped to feel on a first date, yet never dared to expect. A quiet pause followed, filled only by the distant hum of cars and the faint sounds of evening. Leela found herself thinking about all the moments that had led to this getting stuck in the mud. Rushing to the cafe, her nervous entrance, and Jason's unwavering kindness. Each moment had built upon the last, leading to a connection that felt genuine and rare. She realized that sometimes the most memorable experiences came from situations that initially seemed disastrous. Jason broke the silence with a gentle question. Would you like to do this again? Maybe something less muddy next time? Lila smiled, a mix of relief and excitement flooding her chest. I'd like that, she said, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her stomach. Definitely less muddy. They both laughed, the shared humor easing any lingering tension, and Leela felt a sense of anticipation for what was to come. He reached out, lightly touching her shoulder in a friendly, reassuring gesture. I'm glad you showed up today, he said sincerely. You didn't let a little chaos stop you, and that tells me a lot about you. Lila felt a warmth that went beyond words. His acknowledgement wasn't about superficial things. It was about her courage, her willingness to show up, and her authenticity. That realization made her chest swell with appreciation. A quiet confidence settled in her heart. Jason then walked with her toward her car, helping her navigate the small puddles and uneven pavement. His attentiveness was subtle but noticeable, and it made her feel cared for. When they reached the car, he paused, giving her a reassuring smile. I'll text you tomorrow? He asked casually, though the gentle tone made it clear he meant it. Lila nodded, smiling in return. I'd like that, she replied. She got into the car. But before she could start the engine, Jason leaned slightly on the doorframe. You know, he said softly, I think today could be the start of something good. And I'm glad we met. Lila's heart fluttered at his words. There was no pressure, no rush, just honesty and sincerity. Me too, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I'm really glad we met. As she drove away, Lila reflected on the day. She had arrived flustered, embarrassed, and covered in mud, expecting judgment or disappointment. Instead, she had found kindness, understanding, and genuine connection. She realized that what had initially seemed like a disaster had actually created an opportunity for something meaningful. Jason's reaction, his patience, humor, and empathy had stunned her, not in a flashy or dramatic way, but because it revealed what a simple act of kindness could do. The memory of their shared laughter, the park walk, and the heartfelt conversations stayed with her, leaving a lingering warmth. She thought about how rare it was to meet someone who could see beyond the surface, who could listen without judgment, and who could make even a chaotic day feel special. For Leela, it was a powerful reminder that first impressions weren't about perfection, they were about authenticity, courage, and connection. Later that evening, Lila texted Jason a simple message. "Thank you for today. I had a wonderful time." Almost immediately, her phone buzzed with a reply. "Me too. Can't wait to see you again." She smiled, feeling a happiness that was steady and genuine, not the fleeting kind she had experienced in the past. It was the kind of happiness that came from feeling understood, accepted, and valued as she settled in for the night. Lila thought back to the morning, the mud, the panic, the embarrassment. She realized that every mishap had led to a perfect outcome in its own way. If she hadn't gotten stuck, if she hadn't been late and frazzled, she might not have shown her true self so quickly. And Jason's reaction, his kindness, patience, and willingness to see her beyond appearances had transformed what could have been a disastrous first date into a memorable, meaningful experience. She drifted to sleep with a quiet smile on her face, thinking about what the future might hold. The day had been messy, unexpected, and full of surprises, but it had also been beautiful. She felt a sense of hope and excitement, knowing that she had met someone who valued her for who she truly was. And for Leela, that was more than enough to make a day that started in mud end in magic. The next morning, Leela woke up thinking about Jason and the moments they had shared. She remembered the way he had listened, laughed, and treated her with kindness. She felt gratitude, excitement, and a sense of possibility all at once. For the first time in a long while, she realized that life's unexpected moments, the mishaps, the awkwardness, and the chaos could lead to something truly extraordinary. And so, what had started as a stressful, muddy morning had become the beginning of something meaningful. Lila knew that this was only the start of their story, but already it had left an indelible mark on her heart. She smiled, ready to see where it would go next, feeling more hopeful, confident, and alive than she had in a long time.